Odessa, 1941. A pearl by the sea, the largest port on the Black Sea and one of the most important industrial centers of the Soviet Union. The strategic importance of the city could hardly be overestimated. It housed the main base of the Black Sea Fleet, numerous factories and plants, and the port provided communication with the outside world. By the summer of '41, the Hitlerite command perfectly understood. Control over Odessa would open the way to domination of the entire Black Sea coast. The city became a priority target in the plans of the German-Romanian troops. Romanian dictator Ion Antonescu personally promised Hitler to take Odessa in the shortest possible time. For Romania, this was a matter not only of military strategy, but also of national prestige. The return of Bessarabia and access to the Black Sea. The Soviet command, in turn, realized the inevitability of an attack on the city. Already in July, preparations for the defense began. Detachments of the People's Militia were formed, fortifications were built, and military families were evacuated. No one then could have imagined that ahead lay 73 days of heroic resistance, which would go down in history as one of the brightest pages of the Great Patriotic War. By the beginning of August 1941, the confrontation around Odessa had taken clear shape. On one side, the 4th Romanian Army under the command of General Nicolae Ciuperca, reinforced by German units. On the other, the Soviet Coastal Army and the forces of the Odessa Defense District, who were to defend the city in a semi-encirclement. The Romanian forces numbered 17 divisions, over 300,000 soldiers and officers, about 3,000 guns and mortars, and over 100 tanks. They were supported by German air units. The enemy outnumbered the defenders of Odessa 5 to 6 times in manpower, 10 times in artillery, almost 9 times in tanks, and more than 11 times in aircraft. At the beginning of the siege, Soviet troops numbered only about 86,000 fighters. They had at their disposal about 1,000 guns and mortars, 19 tanks, and 48 aircraft. However, the city's defenders possessed two invaluable advantages: the support of the Black Sea Fleet and an indomitable fighting spirit. Under these circumstances, the Soviet command made a decision that seemed incredible to many: to organize a circular defense of the city without the possibility of retreat. On August 5th, the Odessa Defense District was created under the command of Rear Admiral Gavril Vasilyevich Zhukov. The order was extremely clear. Odessa was not to be surrendered under any circumstances. Around the city, 3 lines of defense began to be hastily erected: outer, middle, and inner. Not only military personnel but also the civilian population were involved in the work. Tens of thousands of Odessans dug anti-tank ditches day and night, built bunkers and pillboxes, and laid minefields. The city was preparing for a long siege. At the same time, industry was being restructured for wartime. Factories began to produce mines, grenades, and Molotov cocktails. Ship repair enterprises converted civilian vessels into warships. Even the famous Odessa catacombs became part of the defensive system, turning into warehouses and shelters. On August 5, 1941, Romanian troops launched a massive offensive on Odessa. The 4th Romanian Army advanced on a broad front, delivering the main blow from the north and northwest. The roar of artillery shattered the morning silence. Hundreds of guns unleashed tons of metal on the positions of Soviet troops. After the artillery preparation, the infantry, supported by tanks and aviation, went into attack. In the direction of the enemy's main thrust, the defense was held by units of the 205th and 206th Rifle Divisions. The soldiers met the advancing enemy with organized fire. Despite the numerical superiority of the Romanians, the first attacks were repulsed with heavy losses for them. The artillerymen particularly distinguished themselves, firing directly at the advancing enemy lines. However, the pressure intensified. By the end of the day, Romanian units managed to penetrate the defense in several sectors. The commander of the Coastal Army, Lieutenant General Georgi Petrovich Safronov, decided to withdraw troops to pre-prepared positions closer to the city. The retreat was carried out in an organized manner, with fighting. In the following days, Romanian troops continued their offensive, striving to encircle the city from land. Particularly heavy fighting unfolded in the areas of the settlements of Ilyinka, Belyayevka, and Vagoda. Here, the Romanians threw their best units into battle, including mountain riflemen. But everywhere they met stubborn resistance. On August 10, the enemy, with the forces of 3 infantry divisions, attacked the positions of the 108th Rifle Division of Colonel Nikolai Ivanovich Fadeyev. Despite a 6-fold superiority in manpower, the Romanians failed to break through the defense. Soviet soldiers held steadfastly, launching counterattacks. Fierce clashes sometimes escalated into hand-to-hand combat. By mid-August, the front line stabilized 20 to 30 kilometers from Odessa. The enemy's initial onslaught was repelled, but the situation remained critical. The Coastal Army found itself semi-encircled, holding only a narrow strip of coastline through which communication with the mainland was maintained. Under these circumstances, the support of the Black Sea Fleet became of paramount importance. Ships anchored in the Odessa roadstead delivered powerful artillery strikes against concentrations of Romanian troops. Particularly effective was the fire of the cruiser Chervona Ukraina and the destroyers Shalmyan and Nezamozhnik. Their large-caliber shells literally swept away the advancing enemy columns. In those days, a new tactic of interaction between ground forces and the fleet was born. Spotters from the shore transmitted target coordinates to the ships, and they opened aimed fire. This allowed compensating for the lack of artillery among the city's defenders. On August 5, 1941, the Stavka of the Supreme High Command decided to establish the Odessa defensive region. Rear Admiral Gavril Vasilyevich Zhukov was appointed commander, an experienced naval officer who knew the specifics of a seaside city well. Under his leadership, the formation of a unified command system began, uniting ground forces, the fleet, and local resources. The engineering minds of the defenders worked at their limit. 3 lines of defense were created around the city. The outer one ran 20 to 30 kilometers from Odessa. The middle one, 10 to 15 kilometers away. The inner one, directly along the city outskirts. Each line represented an echelon system of trenches, pillboxes, bunkers, anti-tank ditches, and minefields. The entire civilian population rose to build fortifications. Up to 100,000 Odessans, women, old people, teenagers, came out daily for defensive work. They worked under bombings and artillery shelling, often swapping shovels for rifles when the enemy broke through to positions. The city's industry was swiftly converted to a wartime footing. The January Uprising and Marti factories established the production of mortars and ammunition. Shoe factories sewed army boots. Garment enterprises, military uniforms. Even the famous Odessa film studio began producing fuses for mines. Special attention was paid to the creation of anti-tank weapons. There was a catastrophic shortage of artillery in the city, so engineers developed a unique solution: armored railway platforms. Naval guns, removed from ships, were mounted on the platforms. Such mobile batteries could be quickly redeployed to threatened areas and fire directly at enemy tanks. Every block, every house was turned into a strongpoint. Barricades blocked the streets, loopholes were punched in the walls of buildings, and basements were connected by underground passages. Odessa was becoming an impregnable fortress, ready to fight for every meter of land. The naval shield of Odessa. This is what the city's defenders called the Black Sea Fleet, which became a true salvation for the besieged fortress. In conditions where the city was practically cut off from land, the sea became the only artery connecting Odessa with the mainland. The ships of the Black Sea Fleet transformed into floating batteries, supply and evacuation transports, all in one. The mighty cruisers Chervona Ukraina, Komintern, and Krasny Kavkaz regularly approached the shores of Odessa, opening fire with their 150mm guns on concentrations of Romanian troops. One salvo from a cruiser was equivalent to the strike of an entire artillery battery. The destroyers, Smyshlny, Boyki, and Bezuprechny, maneuvered along the coast, supporting the most intense sections of the front with their fire. In mid-August, a unique tactic of fleet and ground forces interaction was born. Spotters with radio stations were positioned at advanced positions, transmitting target coordinates to the ships. This allowed for targeted fire on enemy batteries, command posts, and concentrations of equipment located deep within the enemy's defenses. The Romanian command was powerless against this tactic. Their artillery could not reach the ships maneuvering at sea. A special role was played by the gunboats Krasnaya Gruzia and Krasnaya Armenia, converted from civilian vessels. Their shallow draft allowed them to approach close to the shore and fire direct shots at advancing enemy columns. Black Sea sailors displayed miracles of heroism, often firing under bombardment from enemy aircraft. But the fleet's role was not limited solely to fire support. Daily, transports arrived in the port of Odessa with ammunition, provisions, and reinforcements. During the defense, over 35,000 soldiers, hundreds of guns, and thousands of tons of ammunition were delivered by sea. In the opposite direction, ships evacuated the wounded and civilian population. The port operated around the clock, despite constant bombings and artillery shelling. Dock workers toiled under fire, unloading transports in record time. Often, merchant fleet sailors themselves took to anti-aircraft guns, repelling attacks from enemy aircraft. Odessa has transformed into a true fortress, thanks to a meticulously planned system of defensive lines. 3 lines of fortifications encircled the city in concentric circles, creating a deeply echeloned defense capable of exhausting any adversary. The outer perimeter, located 20 to 30 kilometers from the city, represented the first line of resistance. Here, advanced positions were established with a developed system of full-profile trenches connected by communication passages. Special attention was paid to anti-tank obstacles. Ditches up to 4 meters deep and up to 6 meters wide blocked all tank hazardous directions. The system was supplemented by artificial obstacles, escarpments, and counter-escarpments. The middle perimeter was located 10 to 15 kilometers from the city and was distinguished by a particular saturation of firing points. Here, the main artillery positions and resistance nodes were situated. The engineering ingenuity of the defenders manifested itself in the creation of unique fortifications from improvised materials. Lacking concrete, they used the famous Odessa shell rock. No metal structures, tram rails and ship parts were adapted. The inner perimeter ran directly along the city's outskirts. Each block was transformed into a strongpoint capable of conducting all-around defense. Barricades of sandbags and tramcars blocked the streets. Loopholes and embrasures were cut into the walls of buildings. Basements were connected by underground passages, forming a complex network of communications. A distinctive feature of the Odessa defense was the widespread use of mine-explosive barriers. In conditions of an acute shortage of industrial mines, local craftsmen organized the production of improvised explosive devices. High-density minefields were created in tank-hazardous directions. Up to 2,000 mines per kilometer of front. The lack of anti-tank artillery was compensated by the creation of special ambush firing positions. These included crews with bottles of incendiary mixture, anti-tank rifles, and light guns. Such groups operated from cover, striking the sides and rear of tanks. An important element of the defense was the creation of mobile reserves. small but well-armed detachments capable of being quickly redeployed to threatened directions. Tramlines were used for their movement, allowing for rapid maneuvering of forces along the inner perimeter of the defense. In conditions of limited resources, the defenders showed incredible ingenuity. Ship guns were mounted on railway platforms, creating mobile artillery batteries. Searchlights from ships were used to blind the enemy during night attacks. Even the famous Odessa catacombs became part of the defensive system, transforming into warehouses, hospitals, and command posts. On August 20th, 1941, the Romanian command launched a large-scale offensive on Odessa. This moment became the true culmination of the first stage of the siege. General Ciuperca threw fresh forces into battle. 5 infantry divisions, reinforced with tanks and artillery. The offensive was conducted simultaneously from 3 directions: northern, northwestern, and western, with the aim of dissecting the Soviet defenses and reaching the outskirts of the city. The main thrust was delivered along the Tiraspol Highway, where the Romanians concentrated their best units, including the Royal Guard Division. A powerful artillery preparation lasted for more than 2 hours. Hundreds of guns unleashed thousands of shells on the defenders' positions. Tanks and infantry advanced behind the fiery barrage. In the direction of the main attack, the 108th Rifle Division, under the command of Colonel Fadeev, held the defense. Despite the heavy fire and numerical superiority of the enemy, the Soviet soldiers did not falter. Artillerymen fired direct shots, mowing down the advancing Romanian lines. Captain Dobrikhin's battery particularly distinguished itself, destroying 11 tanks and 2 armored vehicles in a single day of battle. In the western direction, Romanian units managed to penetrate the defense to a depth of 3 kilometers. A critical situation arose. The enemy threatened to reach an important defense node in the area of the village of Tatarka. The command of the Odessa Defensive District immediately reacted by transferring reserves, a Marine battalion and a tank company, to the threatened sector. On August 23, Rear Admiral Zhukov decided to launch a counterattack with the forces of the 25th Chapayev Division, supported by ships of the Black Sea Fleet. The cruiser Chervona Ukraina and the destroyers Frunze and Dzerzhinsky approached the shore and opened fire on concentrations of Romanian troops. Under the cover of naval artillery, Soviet units went on the offensive. Fierce battles continued until August 28th. Romanian troops, despite a significant superiority in forces, were unable to break through the city's defenses. Moreover, in some sectors of the front, they were repulsed to their initial positions. The enemy's August offensive choked, costing them more than 15,000 soldiers and officers killed and wounded. This success was of enormous importance for the morale of Odessa's defenders. They were convinced that, even in conditions of semi-encirclement and enemy superiority, it was possible not only to defend, but also to launch counterattacks. The Romanian command was forced to admit that a blitzkrieg had not succeeded, and to proceed with planning a long siege. In the history of the defense of Odessa, a special place is held by the amphibious operations carried out by the city's defenders in the enemy's rear. These audacious strikes became true masterpieces of military art, demonstrating the unique interaction of naval, ground, and air forces in the extreme conditions of a siege. The first major amphibious operation was conducted on the night of September 22nd near the village of Grigorievka. The command of the Odessa defensive region decided to strike the enemy's rear to alleviate pressure on the city. For the operation, a battalion of Marines, a rifle regiment, and an artillery division were allocated, a total of about 2,000 people. Preparation was carried out in the strictest secrecy. The paratroopers trained at night, practicing landing from ships onto an unequipped coast. Artillerymen learned to quickly deploy guns on the shore. Ships were camouflaged with branches and nets for a stealthy approach to the shore. On the appointed night, a detachment of ships under the command of Captain First Rank Fadeev left the Odessa port. It included the cruiser Krasny Kavkaz, the destroyers Boyki and Bezuprekny, gunboats and transports with the landing force. Under the cover of darkness, the ships approached the shore in the Grigorievka area. Romanian units, not expecting a strike from the sea, were caught by surprise. The Marines rapidly landed ashore and seized a bridgehead. The main forces landed next. The ships supported the landing with naval artillery fire, suppressing the recovering enemy. Aviation struck Romanian reserves rushing to the landing site. By dawn, Soviet troops had advanced 5 to 6 kilometers deep into the territory, occupying several settlements. Important heights dominating the area were captured. The Romanian command was forced to hastily redeploy reserves to eliminate the breakthrough, weakening the pressure on the main front. The success of the Grigorievka landing inspired the command to conduct an even larger operation. On the night of October 5th, a landing was made in the Chabanka and Sichavka areas. This time, 3 regiments with artillery participated in the operation. About 3,000 people. The landing was carried out simultaneously at 2 points, which allowed for the dispersal of enemy forces. Ships of the Black Sea Fleet provided powerful fire support. The cruiser Comintern and the leader Tashkent fired at Romanian positions, destroying artillery batteries and strongholds. The paratroopers acted swiftly and decisively. They seized a bridgehead up to 8 kilometers deep and up to 6 kilometers wide. Important roads, through which the Romanians delivered ammunition and reinforcements, fell into the hands of Soviet troops. The enemy was forced to divert significant forces to fight the landing. The sky above Odessa became an arena for a struggle no less fierce than on land and sea. The air war unfolded from the first days of the siege and did not cease for a single minute throughout the 73 days of heroic defense. Soviet aviation, based at Odessa's airfields, opposed significantly superior forces of Romanian and German air forces. At the beginning of the siege, the city's defenders had only 48 aircraft at their disposal: I-16 and I-15 fighters and SB bombers. The enemy, however, had more than 500 combat aircraft, including modern German Messerschmitts, Bf-109, and Junkers Ju-87. The air superiority ratio was catastrophic, 1 to 11. Despite this, Soviet pilots displayed miracles of skill and heroism. They took off 5 or 6 times a day, engaged in unequal battles with the enemy, and stormed advancing columns of Romanian troops. The 69th Fighter Aviation Regiment, under the command of Major Lyubimov, particularly distinguished itself. Its pilots developed tactics of sudden strikes. Emerging from behind clouds, they attacked enemy bombers, then quickly withdrew, avoiding combat with escort fighters. The city's air defense was also organized with maximum efficiency. Anti-aircraft batteries were positioned in a ring around Odessa, covering the port, railway junction, and key industrial facilities. Many anti-aircraft guns were removed from Black Sea Fleet ships and installed in stationary positions. Ships anchored in the roadstead also participated in repelling air raids, creating a dense curtain of anti-aircraft fire. Romanian aviation carried out daily raids on the city, attempting to destroy the port and paralyze the defenders' supply. The raid on August 21st was particularly fierce, when more than 80 bombers attacked the Odessa port. Anti-aircraft gunners and fighters shot down 14 enemy aircraft then, but the port still sustained serious damage. The early warning system played an important role in air defense. Observation posts were organized on the approaches to the city, which relayed information about approaching enemy aircraft by telephone. This allowed fighters to be scrambled in time and anti-aircraft batteries to be brought to readiness. In early September, the air situation became even more complicated. Due to a shortage of spare parts and ammunition, the number of combat-ready Soviet aircraft decreased to 30. But even these few machines continued to inflict sensitive blows on the enemy. Attack aircraft pilots learned to operate at extremely low altitudes, hugging the ground and suddenly attacking Romanian positions. In the final weeks of the defense, aviation played a key role in ensuring the evacuation of troops. Fighters covered convoys of transport ships, repelling attacks by enemy bombers. Attack aircraft struck enemy artillery positions, preventing them from shelling the port during the embarkation of troops onto ships. Odessa became an example of an incredible unity between the army and the civilian population. In the very first days of the war, over 100,000 Odessans submitted applications to join the People's Militia. By July 10th, 2 regiments of the People's Militia had been formed, totaling over 12,000 people. Their ranks were filled by factory workers, teachers, students, civil servants, people of various professions and ages, united by one desire: to defend their native city. Simultaneously, destroyer battalions were created to combat saboteurs and enemy paratroopers. Such a battalion operated in every district of the city, consisting of party activists, Komsomol members, and non-party volunteers. They maintained round-the-clock duty, patrolled the streets, and guarded important facilities. When the front approached the city, tens of thousands of Odessans came out to build fortifications. Women, old people, teenagers with shovels and pickaxes dug anti-tank ditches, erected barricades, and installed anti-tank hedgehogs. Within a few weeks, a powerful defense line grew around the city. Over 200 kilometers of trenches and communication passages were dug, and over 6,000 pillboxes and bunkers were built. Odessa's industry fully transitioned to a wartime footing. Factories that had been producing peaceful goods just yesterday began manufacturing weapons and ammunition. The January Uprising plant organized the production of mortars, the Starostin plant, anti-tank mines, and the Vorovsky factory, hand grenades. Even the famous Odessa canning factory reoriented itself to produce incendiary bottles. Odessa craftsmen displayed particular ingenuity, creating weapons from improvised materials. This led to the legendary Bogotov's Katyushas, homemade flamethrowers named after their inventor, worker Vasily Bogotov. These simple but effective devices were successfully used against enemy tanks. Underground groups were organized in the city in case of Odessa's capture by the enemy. Their members meticulously disguised themselves, prepared caches of weapons and ammunition, and studied methods of sabotage. The famous Odessa catacombs, an extensive network of underground workings, became an ideal place for organizing underground bases. Odessans demonstrated mass heroism, not only on the front lines, but also in the rear. Under bombings and artillery shelling, they extinguished fires, rescued the wounded, and restored damaged communications. Doctors and nurses in city hospitals worked around the clock, saving the lives of the city's defenders. Teachers continued lessons with children in bomb shelters. Even during the most difficult days of the siege, cultural life in Odessa did not cease. Theater and philharmonic artists performed for the wounded in hospitals and gave concerts for soldiers on the front lines. The famous Odessa humor became a real weapon. Satirical posters and ditties boosted the morale of the defenders and ridiculed the enemy. September 1941 became a truly critical period in the defense of Odessa. Romanian troops, who had failed to take the city by storm in August, regrouped and brought in fresh forces. General Ciuperca received a categorical order from Antonescu to take Odessa at all costs before the onset of autumn rains, which could turn the steppe roads into an impassable quagmire. On September 2nd, Romanian artillery began a massive shelling of Soviet positions. Fortifications in the area of Tatarka and Dalnik came under particularly intense fire. More than 300 large-caliber guns literally plowed the earth, destroying trenches, dugouts, and firing points of the defenders. Following the artillery preparation, infantry divisions, reinforced by tanks, went on the offensive. The situation was complicated by a catastrophic shortage of ammunition for Soviet troops. Artillery battery commanders received the strictest order to conserve every shell, to fire only at the most important targets. Infantrymen were issued 1 or 2 grenades and a limited number of cartridges. Under these conditions, the fighter's ability to let the enemy approach to the minimum distance and conduct aimed fire became particularly important. On September 8th, Romanian troops broke through the defense at the junction of the 205th and 108th Rifle Divisions and advanced up to 5 kilometers deep. A real threat arose of the enemy reaching the suburbs of Odessa. Rear Admiral Zhukov urgently transferred the last reserves, a battalion of Marines and a company of T-34 tanks, to the threatened sector. The Marines, under the command of Major Kotanov, launched a surprise counterattack on the flank of the breakthrough Romanian group. Acting at night, they attacked enemy positions with shouts of "Polundra!" causing panic in their ranks. Tankers, skillfully using the terrain, went behind the Romanian units and attacked their artillery positions. The breakthrough was eliminated, but the situation remained critical. On September 12th, the enemy made a new attempt to break through, this time in the Dalnik area. Romanian infantry, supported by 40 tanks, attacked the positions of the 205th Rifle Division. Fierce battles ensued. Soviet artillerymen, firing at tanks with direct aiming, managed to knock out 17 vehicles, but the rest broke through to the defenders' trenches. At a critical moment, the command deployed its last trump card, a railway battery, created from ship guns mounted on platforms. This improvised artillery advanced along the railway line to the breakthrough site and opened fire on the concentration of Romanian troops. Powerful 150mm shells literally swept away the advancing enemy chains. The offensive bogged down. By mid-September, the front line stabilized 10 to 12 kilometers from the city. But the situation of the defenders remained extremely difficult. Ammunition supplies dwindled daily. Due to intense bombing of the port, the delivery of reinforcements and supplies decreased. Hospitals were overflowing with wounded. Nevertheless, the morale of the defenders of Odessa remained high. They were determined to stand to the end. Sea supply routes became a veritable artery of life for besieged Odessa. With the city almost entirely blockaded by land, only the sea connected the defenders with the mainland. The organization of uninterrupted supplies of all necessities through the Odessa port became a true wartime logistical masterpiece. The port operated around the clock, despite constant bombings and artillery shelling. Romanian aviation conducted daily raids, attempting to paralyze this vital artery. But the dockworkers displayed true miracles of heroism. They unloaded transports under enemy fire, often working knee-deep in water when the quays were destroyed. To expedite the unloading of ships, special volunteer brigades were formed: students, teachers, artists. During the defense, over 35,000 reinforcement fighters, hundreds of cannons, and tens of thousands of tons of ammunition and provisions were delivered through the port. Every voyage of a transport ship to Odessa became a true feat. Ships sailed without lights, often changing course to avoid enemy air attacks. To protect them, special convoys were created, escorted by warships of the Black Sea Fleet. Fast minesweepers played a special role in supplying the city, using their maneuverability to deliver the most valuable cargo: medicines, spare parts for airplanes, radio stations. Supplying the besieged city required clear coordination and planning. A special headquarters was established in Sevastopol, which determined cargo priorities and compiled convoy schedules. Primary attention was given to the delivery of ammunition, especially artillery shells, which the defenders desperately lacked. On the return journey, transports evacuated the wounded and civilian population. Evacuation was carried out strictly according to lists, with children, women, the elderly, and skilled workers needed for war industries in the rear being evacuated first. During the defense, over 200,000 people were evacuated from Odessa. This significantly reduced the number of civilians in the city and eased the food situation. To protect the port from air raids, a powerful air defense system was created. Anti-aircraft batteries were positioned in a ring around the port area. Many anti-aircraft guns were removed from ships and installed in stationary positions. Ships at anchor also participated in repelling air raids, creating a dense curtain of anti-aircraft fire. A particularly difficult supply situation arose in mid-September, when Romanian troops brought up long-range artillery and began systematically shelling the port. Unloading ships became possible only at night. For camouflage, false quays were created, and port activity was simulated away from actual unloading points. This diverted enemy fire and allowed the city's supply to continue. By early October 1941, the strategic situation on the southern sector of the Soviet-German front had changed dramatically. German troops, having broken through the defenses on the Perekop Isthmus, invaded Crimea and created a direct threat to Sevastopol, the main base of the Black Sea Fleet. Under these circumstances, the Stavka of the Supreme High Command faced a difficult choice: to continue the heroic defense of Odessa, or to evacuate troops to reinforce the defense of Crimea and Sevastopol. After a lengthy analysis of the situation, on September 30th, one of the most difficult decisions was made: to evacuate the Odessa defensive region. The Stavka directive prescribed the evacuation to be carried out in the shortest possible time and with minimal losses. For Rear Admiral Zhukov, this task seemed almost impossible. It was necessary to transport more than 80,000 soldiers with weapons, equipment, and ammunition by sea, right under the enemy's nose, without causing panic among the civilian population, and maintaining the combat readiness of the troops until the last moment. Absolute secrecy became the key condition for success. Only a narrow circle of senior commanders knew about the upcoming evacuation. Ordinary soldiers and junior officers were only told about regrouping and redeployment of units. To mislead the enemy, Soviet troops even intensified artillery fire and reconnaissance activities, creating the impression of preparing for a new offensive. At the same time, the staff of the Odessa defensive region developed a detailed evacuation plan. Troops were to withdraw from the front in stages, in small groups, so as not to form concentrations noticeable to aerial reconnaissance in the port. Rear units, hospitals, headquarters, and equipment were evacuated first. Combat units were planned to be transported last. The Black Sea Fleet allocated almost all available transport vessels for the operation, from large motor ships to fishing schooners. Ships were camouflaged with branches and camouflage nets and moved mainly at night. Cruisers, destroyers, and submarines were allocated to protect convoys from enemy aircraft. The evacuation of heavy weaponry, artillery, tanks, vehicles, presented particular difficulty. To load them, port workers worked around the clock to restore destroyed piers and create special loading ramps. Many unique examples of weaponry, such as railway artillery installations, had to be dismantled and transported in parts. Simultaneously with the preparation for the evacuation of troops, the question of the fate of the civilian population and industrial enterprises was being resolved. It was decided to evacuate the maximum number of skilled workers and engineers, as well as valuable industrial equipment. What could not be evacuated was to be destroyed, so that it would not fall into the hands of the enemy. The first vessels with evacuated troops and equipment left the port of Odessa on October 1st. The operation took place under constant raids by enemy aircraft and artillery shelling. Anti-aircraft gunners and escort fighters worked to their limits, repelling attacks by Romanian and German aircraft. On October 1st, 1941, one of the most complex and unique military operations of the initial period of the Great Patriotic War began: the evacuation of the Odessa defensive region. To conceal preparations for the evacuation, the Soviet command developed a brilliant cover operation. While the first transports with troops and equipment were already leaving the Odessa port, active operations unfolded on the front, designed to convince the enemy of the continued defense. Artillery intensified shelling of Romanian positions. Aviation increased raids, and reconnaissance groups activated actions in the enemy's rear. The Romanian command was completely disoriented. Instead of signs of evacuation, they saw preparations for a new offensive. The tactics of the Soviet command proved so effective that the enemy even reinforced their troops in the Odessa direction, transferring additional units from other sectors of the front. The evacuation was carried out mainly at night. Ships approached the piers without lights, under the cover of smoke screens. Loading was performed in complete silence. Soldiers were forbidden to talk and smoke. Port workers used rubber mallets and tools wrapped in rags to minimize noise. To mask the sounds of loading, artillery duels were specially organized in remote sectors of the front. Special attention was paid to preserving heavy weaponry. Tanks, artillery pieces, vehicles, all of this needed to be evacuated first. Port workers showed miracles of ingenuity, creating loading ramps from improvised materials and reinforcing piers. Specially equipped barges and scows were used to transport particularly heavy cargo. The Black Sea Fleet engaged almost all available transport vessels for the operation, from large motor ships to fishing schooners. Ships made continuous voyages between Odessa and the ports of Crimea, delivering evacuated troops to Sevastopol, Yalta, Feodosia, and Kerch. To protect transports from enemy aircraft, cruisers, destroyers, and submarines were allocated, which escorted convoys and repelled attacks by enemy planes. By October 10th, the main part of the troops and equipment had been successfully evacuated. Only rearguard units remained in positions, continuing to conduct active combat operations, creating the appearance of the entire grouping's presence. They maintained the previous level of artillery fire, set up false targets for enemy aircraft, and conducted radio communications using previous call signs. On the night of October 15th to 16th, the final phase of the evacuation began. The last defenders of Odessa systematically withdrew from advanced positions and boarded the ships awaiting them. To conceal the retreat, special cover groups were left behind, simulating the presence of troops using sound and light effects. Only on the morning of October 16th did Romanian troops discover that the Soviet positions were empty and cautiously began to advance towards the city. By this time, the last ships with the defenders of Odessa were already far out at sea. 73 days of the heroic defense of Odessa entered the history of the Great Patriotic War as an example of unparalleled courage, military skill, and strategic genius. This defense was of immense importance both militarily and in terms of morale and politics. In military strategic terms, the defenders of Odessa tied down a large enemy grouping, 17 divisions of the Romanian army and German units. These forces could not be used in other directions, which significantly eased the position of Soviet troops on the southern flank. During the defense, the Romanian army lost more than 90,000 soldiers and officers killed, wounded, and captured, effectively a third of its composition. Serious damage was inflicted on enemy military equipment. About 100 tanks were destroyed, more than 200 guns, and more than 100 aircraft were shot down. No less important was the moral and political effect of the defense of Odessa. During the most difficult period of the war's beginning, when Soviet troops were retreating along the entire front, the Odessa defense became a symbol of resilience and faith in victory. The feat of the city's defenders inspired soldiers in other sectors of the front, strengthening the morale of the entire country. The experience of the Odessa defense was thoroughly studied and used in subsequent battles of the Great Patriotic War. Particularly valuable were the lessons learned in organizing the circular defense of a large coastal city, the interaction of ground forces with the fleet, and the creation of improvised fortifications in the shortest possible time. Many tactical techniques, first applied during the defense of Odessa, were subsequently successfully used in the defense of Sevastopol, Leningrad, and Stalingrad. These included the tactics of naval landings behind enemy lines, the use of ship artillery to support ground forces, and the organization of urban defensive lines with the involvement of the civilian population. Modern military science still studies the unique experience of the Odessa defense. Of particular interest is the organization of supplying a large group of troops under blockade conditions, the effective use of limited resources, and the brilliantly executed evacuation, which allowed the combat capability of the Primorskaya army to be preserved for further battles. The main lesson of the Odessa defense is the lesson of the unity of the army and the people. Without the selfless support of the civilian population, without the courage of workers, engineers, doctors, teachers, all Odessans, the city's defense would have been impossible. This lesson is relevant today, reminding us that in critical moments of history, it is the unity of the nation that becomes the decisive factor in victory.